It's as big as it can get. This has been in the process for quite some time, in the pipeline for quite some time. Since last October, there were expectations that the Philippines, after 6 years of Duterte presidency, a very pro-Beijing president, someone who wanted to nix the Philippines defense treaty with the United States, there was a hope that after Duterte, not only will we restore bilateral relations, but we'll further expand it. So under Marcos Jr., we may have a new golden era in bilateral relations with the United States, in the same way that Duterte wanted to have a new golden era of bilateral relations with China.
Well, the US already has access to 5 sites in the Philippines. What difference do these 4 more make to Washington's ability to counter Chinese aggression in the South China Sea?
Well, speaking of the 5 pre-existing ones, 2 of them will be very much frontline when it comes to the South China Sea disputes. So one is the Basa Air Base in Pampanga, which is close to the Scarborough Shoal, where the Philippines and China had a naval standoff a decade ago. And the other one, of course, is in Bautista Air Base in Palawan, which is very close to the Spratly Group of Islands. The other ones are much more located close to the areas where we have militant extremism in places like Mindanao, counterterrorism, for instance. But the 4 additional ones, there has been no disclosure of where they're going to be located, but our suspicion is that they're going to be in the northernmost regions of the Philippines, very close to Taiwan. How close they're going to be, that's still a question that we have to resolve, because the Fuga and Mavulis Island in the Philippines, where we have naval bases, are just over 100 kilometers away from the southern shores of Taiwan. In short, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement may give America presence, forward deploying presence, not only close to the South China Sea, where China's expansionism is a big issue, but also close to Taiwan, where there is a fear that an invasion of Taiwan is impending in the coming years. So all of a sudden, the Philippines is finding itself in the midst of this US-China rivalry, and very important to America's plans to deter China's aggression in the Western Pacific and in the region.
So you've talked about what the US gets out of this, but what does the Philippines get out of such an agreement?
Timing is essential. Just a few weeks ago, Marcos Jr. was on his first state visit, and this was to China. In the visit, there was huge announcements of economic deals, $22 billion, but there was absolutely no concession given by China on the South China Sea dispute. So I think President Marcos Jr. came out of that meeting and said, maybe on the economic fronts, we can get something out of our relations with China, although not much came out of Duterte's flirtation with China 6 years ago. But on the geopolitical front, we didn't get much of a concession. So the hope by Marcos Jr. right now is, if the Chinese are not going to budge, then we really need America's help. And remember, this is all about deterrence, because the Philippines' own ability to push back against China is very limited. So I understand those people are critical of U.S. presence in the Philippines, but they cannot turn a blind eye to what China is doing to the Philippines. So as much as we want to be self-reliant and independent in dealing with China, the reality is that the asymmetry in power is just far too much for the Philippines to handle on its own. Therefore, this is about leveraging our alliance with the United States to push back against China as much as possible.
How pleased would Washington be about securing this deal, which would have been much more difficult when Rodrigo Duterte was in charge?
Yeah, I mean, this is really ironic, right? I mean, it's happening under Marcos Jr., who everyone expected it to be continuation of Duterte, meaning closer to China, more hostile to the West. And this is also happening under a Democratic administration in the United States. Biden administration has said democracy promotion will be front and center in foreign policy. But clearly, when it comes to America's policy towards the Philippines, it has been realpolitik. It has been about China. And it is more or less about, yes, we have concerns with the Marcos Jr., we have concerns with the Marcoses, but our priority is China here. So President Biden personally has reached out, has met on multiple occasions with Marcos Jr. They're expected to meet again in April this year in the White House. So this is really about personal diplomacy. This is about realpolitik. So the U.S. is getting the most it can get. So ironically, Marcos Jr. is turning out as one of the most important partners for the United States when it comes to its Indo-Pacific strategy.
But how will the deal impact the Philippines' relations with China? How do you think Beijing's feeling about these developments?
Right, they're definitely in a bind right now, because on the surface, Marcos Jr. is saying exactly the same thing that Duterte has been saying, which is, we're not going to allow our, disputes to be front and center in defining our relations. We want to be more self-independent. We don't want to be relying on the West. We want to diversify our relations. Marcos Jr. is saying all the right things that China wants to hear. But when it comes to actions of Marcos Jr., it's a complete different picture from what we saw under Duterte. So the problem for China right now is this: if they push the envelope and become more aggressive, the more Marcos Jr. will pivot towards the United States. But if they don't do also anything, then what is their, what's their leverage to make MARCOS much more friendly to China? So I think what we're going to see in the coming months and weeks is indications by China that, perhaps they're going to say, we're not going to make big investments in the Philippines unless you do something about what you're doing with the U.S. If you go too far into the U.S. security embrace, then we're not going to make those big investments. So this is where the ball is in China's court. What are they going to offer Marcos Jr. to make sure Marcos Jr. doesn't go all the way into America's strategic embrace and become a pivotal part of America's integrated deterrence strategy?
Just finally, what else was discussed during the meeting between the US Defence Secretary and the Philippine President? And also, how has this all been received by Filipinos?
Yeah, of course. I mean, as far as majority of Filipinos are concerned, America is very favorable, has very favorable ratings, 70-80% of Filipinos in all surveys. There's, of course, a vocal minority who are against greater American presence for national independence concerns, and also those who want to have better relations with China. But the reality is this: for 6 years, Duterte flirted with China right and left. We really didn't get much out of it. $24 billion of investment, barely anything came out. In the South China Sea, the situation got worse for the Philippines. So I think the majority of public will support this. Now, it's not only the EDCA. The Philippines and U.S. are going to have expanded massive military exercises in the coming months. We're talking about 16,000 troops in Balikatan. And not to mention, of course, Australia and Japan will be more and more present in these joint exercises. So this is not only about U.S. and the Philippines. This is also about Australia, Japan, and the alliance structure in this region.
Indeed, it impacts everyone in the region. Richard Haydarian, thank you so much for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.